A very good afternoon from Uganda here. My name is Lynn Komugisha. This is Civic Spaces, our Uganda Diaspora Show, and we are speaking today in particular about the future of democracy in East Africa, looking at Kenya elections that are going on, rather that ended, and whose outcomes are yet to be, of course, known. It is now in the fourth day of counting, and people are still, waiting for the outcome, the general outcome. Who is the president of Kenya in the next few hours, hopefully. So I welcome you to the show, and I hope you are well, and thank you for joining us from wherever you are. Francis Kamuhanda, thank you very much for being part of this show. Joseph Ochieno of UPC, based in the UK, but also a Daily Monitor columnist. Ambassador Henry Mayega is joining us shortly. If he hasn't joined in yet, he's trying to log in, so we will kickstart this conversation, and perhaps he will catch up with us in just a few. I understand that we are all following Kenya elections, but most importantly, we can't wait to hear the announcement of who the next president is. But if I'm to pick your mind so far, let me start with you, Francis. Just to break the ice, what are your thoughts about Kenya's presidential elections and the voting that is going on, and the fever, the anxiety that is in Kenya right now?
Thank you, Lynn, and other fellow panelists for this wonderful debate that we normally have. Of course, discussing the elections in East Africa is pertinent, since we have always struggled with the East African community, which to me I still believe has a lot of flaws that has never come to fruition. So what affects Kenya automatically affects Uganda, and what affects Uganda automatically affects all the other regions, and so it is important to always follow these issues. I would say that what is taking place in Kenya so far, I would say during the way how the campaigns were going, and the initial preparation was good as compared to what they went through in 2007. But however, we always have a challenge when it comes to the ending, which of course even I, for one, am still skeptical of whether it will again not have a lot of dispute that may also end up to bloodshed. But to some extent, I'm confident in their system following the 2017 ruling, where elections were nullified, and there was no much tension, although again the state machinery in Kenya swung into action, and then again we saw again they won the election. But at least that was some degree of I would say democracy at play, although it is a huge debate that we can also debate. But then when I compare it with Uganda, I would
Francis,
say,
before we get there, Francis, I just wanted to pick your mind on the current situation in Kenya, and I think you've already told us. We shall come to that bigger debate later. Thank you very much, Francis. Now, Joseph Ochieno, we're very glad to have you today. I just want to pick your mind on the occurrences and the situation going on in Kenya so far. What are your thoughts before we can get into the actual conversation?
It's fantastic being here. It's good seeing you, your beautiful self, my dear sister and permanent friend Miriam, and of course my old friend Henry. Henry, you owe me, man. We've got issues to discuss. But that is for another day. As far as today is concerned and Kenya, I must say that regardless of the outcome, except bloodshed, these guys have presented a semblance of decency, particularly around the institutional framework, one. Number two, the broader citizenry, particularly those involved in the entirety of the process, notwithstanding the challenges that we are hearing, some of which are rather extraordinary in terms of guys who are rather getting smart at rigging, that by and large, Kenya has moved substantially forward. You're absolutely right that I do media work, and I did huge coverage of these matters, particularly the unfortunate post-election violence in 2007. And that is something that we don't want repeated anywhere in the East African region. So thus far, they seem to be trying to mitigate issues and difficulties as much as possible. But my big concern, though, is that in the last 2 days, some of the things that actually came up, I am actually shocked that Africans can be this determined to seek power by any means necessary. So while by and large it's generally a good thing, some of the revelations, including some of those coming up this morning, are rather unfortunate that it should come from Kenya, it should come from Africa, and why mainly us Africans, and why we are so determined and desperate to seek power by any means necessary. But regardless, I think it is a much more optimistic thing from closer sources. There is a reasonable confidence that I hope both parties will accept the eventual outcome of the elections. But yes, really, every eye is on Kenya, because Kenya, the biggest and largest economy on the continent. Final point is that while I had completed my O levels, it was in Kenya where I went for my O level holidays. And at the time, the only single voice in seeking multipartyism was Raila Odinga's father, Jaramogi Odinga, and it was rather Oginga Odinga. It was rather a lonely one. So fast forward to today, they seem to be the exemplary guys, except guys who are determined to get it by any means necessary.
All right, thank you very much, Joseph, and it's good to have you. Miriam, what are your thoughts on what's happening currently in Kenya? And there are already talks of who the next president is. Others have met already. The newly elected governors and senators are already meeting before even the IEBC can announce the final results.
Lynn, good afternoon, Lynn and Ambassador. And how are you, Joseph? I don't know what time it is now in the UK. And Francis, nice to see you again. It's a good morning here, and we all eyes are on Kenya. And Lynn, to be honest, I'm surprised, but again, I'm embarrassed that I'm surprised, because I blame myself for being pessimistic, but I'm surprised in a good way to see that the Kenyans are withstanding the tension, peacefully waiting for the final result peacefully. I mean, I'm really happy that an African country can pull up a very safe, a very peaceful election up to this moment, and nothing big has happened. In East Africa, we are used to so much drama, so much violence, so much military interventions, a lot of chaos, but Kenya is so far peaceful, and I'm sure people are carrying on their businesses as usual, even though there is tension. And to be honest, I wish by this time they would have declared the winner. So even though the process is so smooth, I again feel like they've dragged it on longer than necessary. But so far so good, and we are impressed that at least we have a trailblazer as far as democracy is concerned, especially for the East African region.
Right, thank you very much, Miriam, for that. But definitely we cannot compare to Kenya, where there's say of so and so is in line, and we are used to just one person being at the head. And definitely the percentages by the time of the vote counts start, the percentage is really big, so you can tell who the winner is. So we can't say much. Henry Mayega, Ambassador Henry Mayega, you're welcome to the show. We are quickly picking our minds on what's happening in the neighborhood. What are your thoughts? Ambassador Henry Mayega?
Okay, thank you very much. Of course, I'm happy to see my old friend, Joseph. For many years, we were doing things, and then we parted ways politically. I don't know his political bearing at the moment, but of course, we're doing quite a couple of things together. And time changes and moves so fast. But what's happening in Kenya, for me, I wouldn't say that I'm surprised about particularly the delay in announcing the results. Rather, it is something that happens with a democracy or within a democracy. Usually, there are always those pangs and labor pains any democratic society has to go through before they can begin to boast about having real democracy. I mean, examples are just all over the place, where countries have been exercising democracy for a long time, and perfection doesn't easily come by. But here we are. The Kenyans, of course, have gone to these elections, and very soon an announcement is going to be made as to who has won those elections, although it is increasingly becoming clear as to who has won those elections. So just best wishes to the Kenyans so that they get over this. And because Kenya means so much for the economy of Uganda, because much of what we import from abroad goes through Kenya. And as such, of course, Uganda wouldn't want that there is instability in Kenya. It's extremely important that Kenya remains as stable as possible, so that that economic vein in Kenya remains open for Uganda to import whatever they need. So, personally, that's all I can say at the moment. But I just want to make just one very simple addition: that democracy is not that simple, because you have to go through the pangs, should I call them labor pains, in order to develop the real democratic processes, the way we know them, especially in the Western world, as they apply. Yeah, thank you.
All right, and now that we are set, thank you very much, everybody, for this wonderful conversation. Now, we understand that Kenya is a role model. Joseph, you've already hinted on the fact that Kenya plays such a big role in its democracy and in its leadership across the East African community. But we also understand that whereas that is important, most countries in the East African community are not have their own, let me say, individual, personalized kind of democracy, approach to democracy. But with these elections going on, as an East African community, how do we move forward? What lessons do we learn from Kenya? How do we, put them to work here in Uganda, in Burundi, in now the big DRC? How do we incorporate what everybody is seeing as democracy in Kenya, in our East African community?
Well, yeah, very, very important that the Kenyan model should really be, in my opinion, the precursor model for the reintroduction of the new East Africa. I think you are absolutely right to contextualize the East African community. I have had huge conversations and arguments around these matters. That coming from the original 3 East African community nations, which was then Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda at the time, and having the new conversations of the expansions, we needed to have a convergency criteria. And the most basic convergency criteria, in my opinion, would have been the democratic principle. And the democratic principle in which all member states have, if you like, almost a uniform process of the electoral system. And that really needed to mean that going forward, we need to follow very closely what's happening in Kenya, their constitution amendments, particularly as far as the electoral laws are concerned, and that these are embedded in the East African legislative process so that all countries, all member states meet this criteria. One of which I must say is, for instance, something as basic as perhaps term limits. I'm not necessarily a big fan of term limits, but there is no reason why we should pick it only when it's convenient to us. Things like perhaps age limit, not necessarily a big thing, if there was democracy prevailing. Things as basic as that. You are absolutely right. If South Sudan is going to join, I know they need to meet some minimum standards. That really, by and large, has not been done. And so in this case, I think that there is nothing more important than the question of political stability. And if we are going to look at Kenya's processes in the last 10, 20 years, then it is actually extremely important that the electoral processes taking place in Kenya today is watched and perhaps is followed as an example. Granted, we have slightly different histories, say when it comes to Tanzania. The difference really, by and large, that Tanzania and Kenya both came from one-party systems. Tanzania has a relative stability, but where the governing political party since independence is by and large in power. Whether or not we want to argue against that is neither here nor there. But really, surely, if we broaden this to a system in Rwanda, broaden this to a system in Uganda, broaden this to a system in Congo, there are really major questions to be asked about this question of Eastern African community and whether or not this East African community is really a possibility of an amalgamation of nations where we have a common currency, a common political system, a common political system, and so therefore a common cultural system for which, just before I came on air, a young friend of mine was reminding me that they are from West Nile of Uganda, but they're very much Congolese in culture and interest and everything else, for which they're absolutely right. Many people think that my name Ochieno is an Ochieno from Kenya. The only thing is that missing is that I am unlikely going to vote in Kenya, just like I heard that some Ugandans crossed via Mount Elgon of all places.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Joseph, for that. I like that you brought up the issue of term limits. And we understand that Kenya's largely avoided the trend of a democratic backsliding that has characterized other parts of the continent and other countries around the world where presidents have removed constitutional term limits or cracked down on opposition parties. Now, Ambassador Henry Mayega, you've heard from Joseph, but we also understand that Kenya, in its beauty, has stood and avoided over democratic backsliding, which we see here in Uganda, and I think in a few other countries in the region. Does this, in a way, create a trend, or is Kenya setting an example, a huge example for the East African community?
There are what we refer to as the basic tenets of democracy that may differ from one country to another. So, but there are things that are particularly important as far as democracy is concerned. For instance, do you have regular and predictable elections? That one is a central tenet. Do you allow people to belong to political parties? That is a central tenet as far as democracy is concerned, and quite a couple of others. So I just want to imagine that we don't have to be necessarily copycats of what is happening in Kenya as far as democracy is concerned. That's okay. And of course, much earlier on, I think somebody was talking about term limits and how either they are liked or they are not liked. But for me, I don't think that that is a very big problem, because even with or without term limits, you can have democracy. I can take you to Europe, and I don't know how many countries in Europe that don't have term limits, where somebody becomes chancellor. For instance, in Germany, Angela Merkel was chancellor of that country, and she served quite a number of terms. You're going to go to the UK, where my friend Joseph has been staying for a long time, where Margaret Thatcher was prime minister, I think, for 3 terms until she was removed. So for me, I don't want to regard term limits really as something that is very central, but rather, do we have regular and predictable elections? Do we have multipartyism despite all its problems? I mean, I'm not saying that, of course, who belong to these political parties are angels. There will be always problems. As far as democracy is concerned, there will be points of departure in terms of that sense of belonging to these various political parties and how those very political parties actually interact. There will always be those points of departure, but the central tenets must remain the same. Are people free to belong to political parties? Are they free to have regular and predictable elections, even if there are roadblocks along the way, and as far as having those elections are concerned? So it's extremely important for us to appreciate these central tenets of democracy, including others which I haven't mentioned. Those are extremely important. The Kenyans, of course, have two houses as far as their legislatures are concerned. They have governors. We don't have governors in Uganda. We don't have two houses. There has been a proposal by some in Uganda to have maybe the lower house and also the upper house. Fine. Once the people of Uganda decide to have those two houses, that would still be okay. And as far as I'm concerned, all that is required is for people probably to have that critical mass of support to support either options that are being suggested. So really, democracy for me, as far as I'm concerned, has to have those central tenets. And once those central tenets are respected, I think we can move on. But of course, as I said before, the road to full-fledged democracy is always bumpy. There are always problems along the way, and it becomes extremely difficult for somebody to prescribe as to what is best for Uganda and what is best for other countries. But rather, each one of these countries, especially in the East African region, since we are discussing this region, to appreciate these important tenets. The Baganda have got a saying that literally says, basically meaning that whereas a dog can go through a sweet potato plantation, garden, without picking any one of those leaves, the dog can go through successfully and there will be no problem, but a goat will go on picking these leaves. So I don't want us to, of course, to believe that we are goats or dogs, but the fact of the matter is that the message is very simple as far as that saying is concerned. That whereas Kenya chooses a path, a democratic path, replete with all sorts of things, governors, Senate, which is supposed to be the upper house, and then the lower house, and all these kinds of things, that is their choice. As to whether Uganda pursues that kind of approach, and as far as our democracy is concerned, or any other country, Burundi and the new entrance to the East African region, it is entirely their own decision. Thank you very much, Lynn.
Right, thank you very much, Ambassador Henry Mayega. And Miriam, over to you. You've heard from Joseph, you've heard from Ambassador Henry, and we're trying to, look at Kenya. Everybody's saying Kenya is the most democratic nation in the East African community, and therefore we ought to pick lessons here and there. There were funny tweets, being thrown around. Of course, that is propaganda, and that is a lot of, noise. People saying that it is funny seeing what's happening in Kenya, and the same cannot happen here in Uganda, let alone Rwanda, Burundi, and Tanzania, and the rest of the community. Miriam, from what you've heard from Joseph and Ambassador Henry Mayega, and in light of what's happening in Kenya, surely can we have the perfect democracy on the East African community?
Lynn, as usual, my friend Ambassador Mayega was so quick to whitewash and cover up what entails democracy. Ambassador, the biggest tenet of democracy is the word choice. Are people free to choose the leaders they want? That is the key, the most key. So words like transparency, freedoms, transcend the regularity. So what you are talking about, regular, I think you are referring to the Ugandan and the Kenyan case. And what we have are mostly like rituals. I mean, saying that you are holding an election doesn't make it an election. It's actually like a process, but it lacks the details. It's just like recently they are terming it as a selection or just rubber stamping whatever the predicted outcome is already. So as you know, the jokes going around social media are like, oh, in Kenya, if you are Uganda today, we would have declared the winner a long time ago, because the winner is already declared even before the voting happens. You can't call that an election under democracy. Democracy is about choice. Are people free and ready and have the freedom and choose the leaders they want? Are those leaders having the freedom to access the people and campaign and set their agendas as they want? So the word choice here is very key: transparency, fair, and the freedoms of association and all of that, which lack in most countries in East African region: Kenya, Uganda, DRC, Rwanda, Burundi, and as Joseph has said, we still lack what real democracy is in East African region, and we should have set it up as one of the requirements for joining the community. Can we have predictable and regular elections along the East African community? And the term limits, Ambassador Mayega, very important, especially when you have like the presidential system that Uganda has. So the examples you gave around Germany and Britain, if you look closely, their systems of democracy are different from our system. Our system can be maybe compared to USA, and they have the term limits. And a presidential system puts power in one person, who is the president, and that person has to be limited because he has like all the power to subdue competition, frustrate other processes which could be coming up, as the case is in Uganda. So we should look at Kenya, really, I look at Kenya as a role model as far as East African community is concerned. Even though it has the baby steps, it's taking the baby steps as real democracy is. But if you compare with Uganda, if you compare with Sudan, if you South Sudan, if you compare with the DRC or Rwanda, the Kenyan example is a shining example as far as East African community is. And the Tanzanian example can be emulated, but still, the Tanzanian example has a challenge. Like, power hasn't changed so far from one party to the other. So we don't know if they can pass that test yet. And they've had some episodes of violence, some real issues of arresting opposition leaders as far as during the last elections. So the Kenyan example is so far much better than them. And then again, one thing we cannot underlook is that Kenya has, at least for the first time, overturned an election by the court, and the people have been stable. There has been a re-election, and the country has moved on. That is a precedent that you can't imagine happening in Uganda, for instance. So the way they've structured their constitutional structure, the way the electoral commission is independent, the way the judicial is independent, and the legislature. So I don't know what Mayega said. The tenets of democracy include the separation of powers. And in Kenya, those powers are separated. You can clearly see that the judicial is very independent of manipulation from the executive. The legislature is independent equally. And those three arms of government work hand in hand to create a product that we see today. So if we can borrow that, I think it would be a step forward from where we are today in Uganda.
Hey, thank you, Miriam, for that. Francis Kamuhanda, I want us, Joseph started off very quickly and at least showed us the path to take when he mentioned the issue of term limits as one of the issues that are really very key in terms of democracy. And we understand that Kenya has, moved away from that. So you've heard from Joseph, you've heard from Ambassador Mayega and Miriam in that direction. I understand that you, as an ant coordinator in the US and as one of the leading opposition parties back home in Uganda, you've always been against term limits. Why is this so important for any democracy? But before Francis can come in, Joseph, kindly mute your microphone. We have some background noise. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So Francis, please go ahead.
Thank you, Lynn, and the other fellow panelists for the insights you have given and shaping this conversation. Yeah, I agree with you, Lynn. Joseph pointed out something very important in as far as term limits are concerned. That is the first step in as far as exercising democracy and shared responsibility of our country is concerned. But I'm a little bit frustrated by Ambassador when he said that is not a problem. But I understand his perspective, because as a representative of the president, indeed he understood the words of the president to always follow what he wishes. But however, having said that, once leadership is not shared, I would say service. I would say serving a country is not shared, and you think it is the responsibility of one person, as if Uganda is the one, or one person is the one to lead it to a promised land. That's where we normally go wrong, and it is important for us. I always echo and take back ourselves to the preamble of the Constitution, which I know Ambassador knows, but for purposes of being on record, let me capture a few things. The preamble of our Constitution says, "We, the people of Uganda, recalling our history, recognizing our struggles against the forces of tyranny and oppression, are committed to building a better future, exercising our sovereignty and inalienable rights to determine the form of governance for our country, and having fully participated in the constitution making process, noting that the constituent assembly and so on do hear in and through this constituent assembly adopt XYZ and so on." So those words have meaning. I don't think they were just put in as a preamble to our Constitution for decoration purposes. And that's why we say we should always learn. So when Ambassador, for example, says there is no problem, there is a problem, just analyzing the preamble of our Constitution itself, he should know that power is shared. He should know that we are in a race. If we are to develop our country, you have to pass the baton to another person, and so on. We have ideas, but in Uganda, there has been separation of ideas. I do agree with him that yes, what is happening in Kenya may not be a copycat, but it is a trajectory. It is a trend that is showing that there is some level of progress. That is a credit. I think Ambassador should accept, or the government of Uganda should learn that there is a trajectory. Having learned from the violence of even the past governments in Kenya, the violence of 2007, you see there are some steps that are heading towards recommendations that have been given. But in Uganda, you see, I'll give an example. In 2016, a court ruling between the petition of Amama Mbabazi and I would say the elections, how the elections went, they gave 10 points that should be worked on. But now in 2021, you saw a repeat of even a worse situation than what happened before during the 2016 petition. One of them being that, for example, if I can recall, that sanctions against state organs or officers who violate the provisions of the law. Now we come to 2021. Did the government of Mayega learn anything, or they forgot completely everything? And if such a simple things are not put in place, are we heading in the right direction? The answer is no. And if we are aiming at a bigger community, the East African community, do you think we are going to bring in all these kinds of jumbled kind of situations, and then we think we are going to grow as a community, as the East African community? The answer is no. So there must be things that we all agree in uniform, or we say these are bringing us together, that we should also begin toying and emulating, so that as the East African community grows, then we shall reap the benefits of why we are coming together. For now, that's what I can say, but he compared the systems of Germany, Britain. Those are systems that already have checks and balances. In Uganda, for example, we don't have those checks and balances. If we have them, they are dictated by one person. And that's what we are trying to say. No, we need to have a system that is working for all. And we are having at least our brothers and sisters in Kenya that are taking what Miriam is calling the baby steps. Can we also begin that trajectory and we move towards that? And then at the end of the day, we shall all realize and be happy in what we are calling the East African community. Thank you.
Thank you, Francis, for that. Back to you, Joseph. We're seeing that in Kenya, there were two issues at play. We have a new picture of the hustlers and the older version of dynasties, and then becoming coalitions. This has played a major role in what we call democracy currently. But we also understand that what Miriam and Francis have hinted on as a one party, one man thing, not handing over from one party to another, has been ongoing. But when we look at Kenya, dynasties have been the rulers for some decades now. They've been the rulers. And we'd hoped that perhaps the coalition or the new, the newbie who is the Hustlers Nation would perhaps change the political terrain there. So when we talk democracy and we look at, and we want to take Kenya as an example, I worry that there's something lacking in there. I don't know what you think, Joseph.
I think you're absolutely right. Henry will possibly agree with me at a convenient time that he and I come a long way on the question of the democratic process. In fact, if I were to give my benchmark, I would suggest that Kenya, indeed, while Kenya sort of minimally leads, I would take you back to the first UPC government in Uganda, and indeed the second UPC government, including the process of elections, and indeed the parliaments of UPC 2 and the parliaments of UPC 1 to be top. So that is one. Number two, you're absolutely right again on the context of the hustler and others. When I was hinting at 1982, I didn't really want to take you very, very much fast. It is actually necessarily the case that actually, if Kenya can be the example today, it tells you how bad the situation is within East Africa and how bad the situation is in Africa. The consolation for these guys is that while you could argue that a few families in Mount Kenya and perhaps Rift Valley, and perhaps it might be the case going down to a bit of Nyanza, that a few families sort of control the broader polity, their politics actually has been much more about personal merit driven than, if you like, competitive ideals based, which individuals move with their communities, with their identities, and becomes a bit of an identity politics. But by and large, the element of collision, the element of lack of compromise, the element of changing side quickly, and in particular, perhaps doing the big thing, makes it actually look something slightly better than what you and I would perhaps be looking elsewhere within the region. Number one. Number two, the other thing is, I was telling some other networks the other day that regardless of the question of big corruption in Kenya, in fact, they've got big men and big corruption, just like some of the big corruptions in Uganda. Their systems, by and large, work. Their institutions, by and large, work. Kenya as a nation state is the top economy in the region. So in a way, it's really about that. But it's not that Kenya is the fancy thing that I would like my young, beautiful children to be growing into in the next decade. Certainly not. In fact, the East Africa that I would like to see, in the event that hopefully, God willing, by the end of the year, I actually lead UPC, and I understand Henry was asking where I am. Henry, by the way, I am in the mainstream UPC that you left me in, the UPC founded by Milton, but absolutely mainstream and democratic. We don't want to go into that. But in the likely event that I become the leader of that party, I'll be revisiting the question of the East African community, including how we pick our legislators to ensure that members Ugandans who end up at the East African Legislative Assembly are people who have been tested by not only their parties, but tested by ordinary members and tested by ordinary voters, so that these people, when they go to Arusha, they go to represent the voices of the Ugandans and indeed the voices of East Africans, and then they've got some kind of big idea that's going to put this region forward, and some big ideas that's going to put this continent forward. I am saying to you this, Lynn, because I'm saying that I think it is actually not right that up to this day we should be having this kind of conversations. In 1982, one of the reasons why I refer to that was I was shocked that after Idi Amin, we were able to have a multi-party elections. And in my opinion, that is the last multi-party elections in Uganda with a taste of multi-partyism, as it were to date. That's my constitutional opinion. It remains the same, and we can have a conversation on these matters another time. But at that time, Kenya was a one-party dictatorship, and I was asking, and in fact, I happen to have lived in Eldoret most of the time at the time, which is basically the Ruto zone, no implications at all. And I was wondering that Kenyans were content with one-party system, and I really talked and I thought they were far down there. The fact that they went through that, Moi was compelled to go multi-partyism, and since Moi, we've had Kibaki contested, we've had Uhuru Jr., and he's going away regardless of whether he likes it or not, and that we're going to have a possibility of a president who does not come from the Rift Valley and who does not come from Mount Kenya, notwithstanding whatever may happen. That is the progress that Miriam is talking about, and the possibilities, if you like, of the building blocks that we're talking about. Now, if you then look at Tanzania, there's something slightly different. While these guys were compelled to move pluralists, and Nyerere retired, since Nyerere, we've had nearly the fifth president, absolutely massively contested within the one governing party, but a democratic system within that one governing party, and not a hold of an individual or a clique of people within that political organization. Now, back to us in Uganda, you can't contest 1962 general elections. I know that is history to some of you guys. You can't contest 1980 general elections. You know, Museveni lost 1980 general elections and he never went to the courts of law. I still challenge Mr. Museveni. I want to leave Henry out of this one for the moment. I would still want to challenge him that we have scholars, Ugandan scholars have conversation. What exactly happened in the competitive multi-party elections in 1980? That was so bad that we could not go and resolve this in the courts. And that was so bad that come 1986, we banned political parties for 20 years. It's not surprising this is sort of where we are at the moment. But taking you back to Kenya, I think that while their system is where it is at the moment, and I have had a very considered view and conversation with some of these guys, including some of the top advisors on both sides on these matters, that very likely after these elections, in the next 10 years, it is going to be the case that Kenyan politics will move away, and I do hope it does, move away from personality, personal merit element of groups and identities. But I hope genuine political parties around the likes of UPCs, which are built on values and ideals and ideology, and so that politics then becomes in Kenya a matter of if you like, contested substance in terms of issues rather than personalities and identities. For that, I think still Kenya is very much on the low side. I am worried about them, but you know the amazing thing, even with that, the election today is 10 times what happened in Uganda just the other year. let alone the fact that we had 50,000, nearly 50 people dead. And you know, to date, one of the things that Miriam was talking about, it's extraordinary. We've not seen an opposition leader being dragged by the police. These are things for which we cannot discuss across political divide. And my brother Henry, I think we need to face these things head on at this generation, particularly yours and mine, as the Miriams look up to us, to try and deal with it as responsible Ugandan citizens across the political divide without necessarily point scoring around them.
Wonderful there, Joseph. Indeed, thank you very much. You highlight very key issues, but this is what brings me to Ambassador Henry Mayega. I want to, what is your reaction to what Joseph has highlighted, especially the last bit where he talks about across the political divide, we need to address some of the things that really keep us looking ugly in the face of democracy. And this is why many people are looking at Kenya as such an example, because we're not seeing what we usually see here in Uganda or elsewhere in the community happening. So, Ambassador Mayega, I want to pick your mind on what Joseph has highlighted, but I also want us to look at the issue of democratic stagnation and long-term disillusionment with politics among young youth, which has been characterized, which has actually come up in Kenya, because most youth did not vote. They were saying, I mean, there's nothing new. These people are political elites, and they're going to just come in and pretty much do the same. Nobody is different. Ambassador.
Yeah. So I was just wanted to say that growing a democracy definitely is a very difficult path, and it's just work in progress. And as far as I'm concerned, because you're not going to wake up in just one day and you think that you're going to be as democratic as those countries like the US, which boasts of democracy for over 250 years. So in as far as I'm concerned, I think growing democracy in any country, in a society, is work in progress. It all depends on the determination of the people who are in that country. And the moment you don't raise that critical mass to change things the way you want them, because you cannot assume that you want things the way they should be, and therefore you should carry the day. And as far as the political decisions in a country or in your country are concerned, so you must always, because political, processes are about numbers. Whether you talk about having enough members in the parliament in order to pass legislation the way you want the legislations to be, whether it's about passing a policy in as far as how government runs things, it goes back to one thing, namely the game of numbers. And so for me, as far as I'm concerned, democracy is work in progress. You cannot assume that you're going to do things in the best way possible in just one single day. It takes time in order to develop democracy. Yes, I gave examples in Europe of the UK and of course Germany, where Margaret Thatcher ran, I think, the country for about 4 terms, and Angela Merkel, I don't know how many terms, maybe 4 terms or something like that. But at the end of the day, those countries, and I want to reiterate my position, that I have absolutely no qualms in as far as supporting the removal of term limits. In future, if Ugandans want, they can go through again the same process, maybe parliament, if there is enough numbers, and then we'll go back to the term limits. There is nothing that is cast in stone. These things can change any time, for as long as people raise enough numbers on the floor of parliament to change the laws the way they want them. So I have no problem with term limits. For me, what I would have, and with Joseph, I remember when we were still struggling in order to free the political environment in the country, we said, open up the political space. And for me, that's what I wanted. Allow people to belong to their political parties, because in the past, when we didn't have political parties, all of us were lumped together in the NRM, and there were the parties, in other words, were not operational. And it became extremely difficult for politics to be called competitive, because everybody had to run on individual merit, Right now, as we speak, after the plebiscite of 2005, political parties were allowed to operate and everyone is free either to form or to associate with any. And that's why we're not talking about a number of parties in Uganda. And as a result of that, it means that people have a choice. Although I don't want to agree with Miriam, who thinks that there are no choices for people of Uganda to make. We can make a choice. You can make a choice to belong to any T. I've had somebody there, one of us who is on the panel, saying he belongs to the NT. I don't know where Miriam belongs. Joseph has said where he belongs. He says he still belongs to the original UPC that was formed by Milton Obote. I belong to the NRM. And there are quite a number of people who belong to various political parties. And that is as a result of the campaign that we made before 2005. And we want to have that referendum that birthed the formation or association. People wanted to, associate with all sorts of parties that they wanted. So that free choice is there. You can belong to any. Transparency, fine. It's just a matter of conjuncture. Miriam raised it. As far as our politics is concerned, the transparency is still a very big problem in the country. I want again to say that it's all about, I think it's just also a matter of conjecture, because yes, another person may say that there is transparency. Miriam is saying there is no transparency. So it's all about really agreeing on how we should move things ahead. And at the beginning of this conversation, I remember I said that nobody can claim to be an angel as far as these political processes are concerned. I'm not saying that, of course, the UPC is full of angels. I'm not saying that the NRM is full of angels. I'm not saying ANT as angels, or FDC or any other political party that plays or takes part in the politics of Uganda. So in each one of these political parties, you'll find people who cross the red lines of the law. And so how do we behave in those kinds of circumstances? And I think what is important is for us to make sure that there are mechanisms in the country that ensure that even if we disagree politically, still the political processes can rhyme with the basics or the basic tenets of democracy. For me, that is extremely important. And so when some choose to become violent, especially when we are moving towards elections like it was before the elections of 2021 in January, of course, the red lines of the law are going to apply. You cannot go on torching roads. You can, and I don't hear anyone in the opposition really mentioning these kinds of things, that actually NRM supporters were also target of some opposition goons, especially from the NUP. And so the assumption was that those who crossed the red lines of the law were to be left by the security agencies or the security personnel. And the riots that were in the city should have left actually just continue. Management of state affairs does not run that way. Whenever there are some who choose to cross the red lines of the law, definitely the security forces are going to deal with those kinds of situations, and they must, and because that is their job, in order to ensure that the country is as orderly as possible, and to allow all those who want to take part in the politics, want to take part in elections, to have a free environment in which to do so. But I also wanted to probably go back to this, of course. Joseph was talking about quite a number of things that happened right from the 60s. Yes, we have gone through quite a lot of things. There was a time, for instance, in 1980, between 1979 April to 1980 December, when we changed the heads of state 5 times, but at a whooping cost to human life. So it's not just a question of changing leadership in the country, but rather there has to be a qualitative improvement in as far as the political processes in the country is concerned. And I want to believe that actually that qualitative improvement, despite the fact that it has to continue, it has to be continuous, there has definitely been lots of qualitative improvement in as far as our politics is concerned. I'm not saying that, of course, we are there, but we're still moving. And I said before, this is work in progress, and we must continue working at that. Now, going to Kenya, of course, people have argued differently. saying that Kenya is an example. Fine. There are things that we can learn from our neighbors in Kenya. There are also things that they can learn from us as Uganda. Because there was a time before the mayhem that erupted in Kenya in 2008, when the Kenyans were laughing at us. They were saying that Uganda had become a laughing stock because of the insecurities that we had in the 70s, in the early 1980s, and part of the 1990s. And we had become a laughing stock, according to them, and they were laughing at us. Until it dawned on them in 2008, and they pounced on each other after those elections, if you remember. And then the rest was history. But of course, they have moved, they learned a lesson or two, and they have moved to where they are. So in other words, what I'm trying to say here is that actually democracy is work in progress. You cannot assume that you can develop democracy in our respective countries, whether it is in Uganda or Kenya or Tanzania, in just one single day. That is not a possibility. These things have to take time. And as I've said at the beginning of this conversation, the Americans have had democracy for the last 250 years, but they still have problems. They haven't come to a point where they think that that is the best that they deserve. And as far as democracy is concerned, they talk about campaign finance, they talk about, I've just been watching a news clip here, how the Trump Mar-a-Lago residence was raided in Florida. And there's a lot of fallout in the US at the moment that why target Trump's residence in Florida over flimsy things and not Hillary Clinton, who actually was using a personal email address to do government work. And so people are wondering. So these are things, in other words, which show that actually democracy is work in progress, and we must continue working on these things. I'm not saying that we are there, and I'm not saying that each one of these political parties we have in Uganda is actually a park of angels. It's not a park, we are not a park of angels in any one of these political groups. I remember 2 weeks ago, we were talking about us working out a way forward as a country, having all sorts of discussions, of which I believe this is part. That is okay as far as I'm concerned, because I mean, we must try really as much as possible to accommodate as many views that we have as Ugandans. That's extremely important. There's no doubt about it. But as far as I'm concerned, democracy is work in progress, and we must continue to work on it. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much, Ambassador Mayega. Miriam, we are at a point where we are now poking holes in Kenya's democracy as a benchmark for the East African community, because clearly we can see that many countries have their own, path of democracy, have their own definition of what democracy is to them. And if we are to go by the tenets of democracy, clearly, if you approached every nation on the East African community, they'll tell you, no, we are doing ABCD and we are in line for, doing what democracy really entails. But if we are to really bring it down a little bit to Uganda, we understand that the opposition, if I could stick to that, the opposition in Uganda, being a multi-party, country, the opposition keeps saying we are not a democratic country. Yet, in all ways, according to Ambassador Henry Mayega, we are following up on the tenets of democracy. Miriam, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, when it comes to democracy, what tenets of democracy are we following? Nothing. Actually, what we have is democracy on paper. But in actual fact, we still lack a lot of inputs to really create what entails a democratic process. For instance, Ambassador Mayega has talked about having open space, open political space. But do we have open political space in Uganda? Actually, what we have, I used to have the image I could use. I don't know if the Constitutional Square is still guarded by the police. It's like very symbolic of what Ugandan democracy is. Ugandan democracy is like that space, but it's enclosed. We actually have like a virtual military garrison of our political space. You cannot hold a political rally. You cannot consult your constituents if you are opposition. You have no funding. You have no say as far as government institutions are concerned. You can be arrested anytime. You even have no freedom of movement. You don't know where tomorrow you will be. You can't speak because they will kick you out of a TV station. So where is the open space as far as a political, where is the open political space is in Uganda as far as opposition is concerned? And Ambassador Mayega, you cannot have a multi-party process in democracy without a working opposition. A working opposition is a key tenet of a multi-party process, because you cannot challenge yourself. You cannot check yourself. You must have an alternative leadership, alternative policy processes, alternative institutions which check the ruling party. And that's what you call an open democratic process. So Uganda, those things are not there. So what we have is like democracy on paper. On practice, we have nothing. We don't even have an independent electoral commission. So how can we safeguard a democratic election, which is a very key issue in choosing the leadership? Imagine if Uganda had an electoral commission which is similar to Kenyan, where you can have an IEBC which is not controlled by the ruling party. The rumors are that the Ugandan Electoral Commission get phone calls when they are counting votes. Those are rumors, but even the results can tell one thing or the other about those rumors. So if we can't have independent electoral commission, if the military keeps blocking the opposition groups from mobilizing, from accessing the voters, from talking to the population, even from running for funding and support and building their institutions which can compete favorably with the ruling party, then we don't have democracy. I mean, it's not about putting it on paper and in the constitution, but if we don't practice, we don't have it. Back to the Kenyan processes. As we discuss the way forward for Uganda, as we really would like to, I mean, lessons from the Kenyan processes, that does Africa need its own tailored kind of democracy? You see, Ambassador Mayega was saying that we can't compare, say, Uganda to USA because they've had 200 years of practice and they are still working on it. Does Africa need its own tailored kind of democratic process? Does Uganda need its own tailored democratic process? I don't think so. I mean, we can adjust on the details, but basically the key tenets freedom. I mean, do Africans need a particular different kind of freedom? We all need the same freedom. We all need the same human rights. We all need the same independence to mobilize. We all need the same freedom to choose our leaders, which is through elections. So democracy is the same, but we can practice differently, but the tenets are the same. Transparency, we need freedom of association. We need, the parties need funding and mobilization. Maybe the difference can be on how we mobilize our parties, because an example which I think we shouldn't copy in Kenya is the way they are juggling their parties around. I mean, every other day you have alliances of individuals dressed as political parties, but they are not. Political parties should have ideas, should be standing on a particular platform which is issue-based, but the Kenyan stuff is about individuals, the personalities, leaders like Kalonzo Musyoka, like Raila Odinga are like local chiefs in their own enclaves. So it's kind of hegemonic in that aspect, like a particular class of people, either business or political, is controlling the political structure and the political processes, and the masses are just following. Even that is not democracy. That's why I referred to Kenyan processes as baby steps. They are yet to get there. And we need a scenario whereby you say, like Ochieno referred to UPC. We know UPC stood for ABCD. I don't know today the case as far as UPC is concerned, but it used to stand for something. Today, if you ask me, what does NRM stand for? I don't know. Ambassador Mayega, I don't know. I used to belong to NRM. You were asking me where I used to belong. I quit a long time ago when NRM became a party. I was in the movement, not to the party. I don't identify with, especially when M7 said that Tubejeko, because for me, the way I understand democracy is about consensus. The moment you feel you don't want to listen to the other group, the moment you feel you are the only person with a vision, the only person who should be heard, you have already deviated from democracy. Democracy is about consensus. Democracy is about listening from each other, reconciliation, checks and balances, transparency, freedoms to choose to belong, freedoms to choose the leaders you desire, not rigged elections. You can't call a rigged election an election. We should create another name for that, but it can't be an election. So as far as African is concerned and the lessons we can pick from Kenya, can we build strong institutions? The Kenyan processes, Kenyan people are where they are today because of civic activity. The people themselves are the ones who push the government to be transparent, who have built those institutions. The Kenyan academia, today the political heroes of Kenyan change, of Kenyan democracy are the academia, the Ngugi wa Thiong'o, the Michelle Mugo, the Rubadiris, those who were chased even by Moi and arrested, the students. Today, the Ugandan university is like a prison. Even holding a social media meeting leads you to expulsion. What type of society are we creating? And how are we going to create future leaders who understand democratic processes if we can't even have a discussion about politics in a university campus? That is so sad for Uganda. The issue that is happening in Makerere is really a bad precedent, and I hope someone really takes it. Because how are we going to groom our future leaders if we can't even allow them to practice political processes, democracy at that level? When you're a student, that's like an age where you are exploring your ideas, where you're practicing what you believe in, to see what works and what doesn't work, and how you should move forward, especially as you graduate into a bigger community. So if we block the conversation at that level, how are we going to groom the leaders of tomorrow in our society? So no, that's all in for now. I wanted something skipped my mind. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Miriam, for that. Francis Kamuhanda, you've heard from Miriam and what she thinks our democracy has come to. But I also want us to look at the issue of people saying, because now we are focusing on the Kenyan elections and the general feel that it is one of the most democratic nations on the East African community. We understand that since that country, the transition into multi-party democracy in the early 1990s, electoral competition has generally revolved around loose coalitions. Now, these coalitions are centered around individual political leaders. We have seen that. They promise to deliver votes from their ethno-regional strongholds and ABC and blah, blah, blah. But we also understand that the coalitions allegedly seem to be helping in achieving certain things for them as a country. Would you say that the newest approach to our politics here in Uganda, for example, the Mao DP DP and NRM's cooperation agreement. Are we going to see, if we are really going to take a look at Kenya as a democracy, are we going to start picking all those things, and will they help us in any way to achieve our democratic desires?
Thank you, Lynn, and the other panelists so far for the input in this conversation. I'll begin by saying, to me as an individual, the politics of tribal kingpins, like as it is in Kenya, I'm vehemently opposed to that, because that in itself will lead into a dangerous path, where now if our own is not in government, then the government is not working for us, or our own is the one who is supposed to lead us to the promised land. But I rather say that, and then of course, for me, I would call it, yes, the coalitions, much as they are loose, but they are a sign that people can agree to work. But I don't also need where they make them and then they lose the principles and I would say the mantra of their mother political parties where they belong, because that's what will bring a problem, that anytime they are working on these loose coalitions and something does not work out, it collapses. And once it collapses, it may bring even more disastrous and undesirable outcomes, like as we have been, as we saw in the past, how it turned negative. But having said that, for the case of Uganda, I also do believe that there is what we may need to say clean conversations in as far as different players in politics are concerned, but with the aim of putting up a government or suggestions that are moving Uganda forward, not the M7 system, what he does with the iPod. So that's where I tend to disagree. Having said that, then I would go back to what Ambassador Mayega said, that we have a problem of transparency. I'm glad he acknowledges that. But then he was saying that the way how opposition politicians or political parties operate, then we have goons and so on. They go and ban the roads and government will not look. The truth is, what Ambassador is underscoring is, what leads to that? That's what we should ask. Do people just wake up and go and ban roads or mount roadblocks or begin witch hunting each other? The issue is simple: lack of freedom of expression, lack of allowing people to exercise their democratic rights. For example, freedom of assembly, freedom of association. I would say unwarranted government deprivation of rights to life. If at this era we still have drones flying in Uganda arresting people secretly, we still have safe houses, torture chambers, where people are kept and they are not paraded in court. Ambassador, that's what brings the problem. I understand whenever you are briefing the president, like the way how you have been discussing here, I wish if some of these things you would bring them to him and put them clear, say that this is not right and it is bad for our country. And as we have multi-party political dispensation, let people be able to discuss their ideas clearly. I still believe that, for example, if I'm not a spokesperson for NUP, I belong to NT, but if Bob Wine was not stopped from going to have a rally, which is a democratic right, perhaps the proceeding issues would not have occurred. So that's where I want Ambassador Mayega to focus. And as I agreed with him, we are not going to copycat what is happening in Kenya. But we are saying as we move on, we should be learning lessons. Like I would echo again that the ruling that that they did with the Babazi case in 2016, they said there are some reforms that the Electoral Commission or government should undertake before the 2021 elections. But zero was undertaken. And what do we see? That the arm of government, the violence that government was meting on its own people increased, generally doubled compared to 2016. Now we have death and so on. So those are the trajectories that we are saying, no, we can reverse. And we are saying there are pieces that we can learn from Kenya. Also, as he said, Kenya can learn from us. That we have, these are the ones that we are not going to say the East African community, and we keep singing it without changing our mindset towards different things that we look at. Yes, we are not all not going to agree the same way politically with Kenya and so on and so forth, but there can be elements of interest that are bringing us together as a community, and that's how we can progress. But otherwise, if we don't do that, His Excellency Mayega, we are smartly dressed, going nowhere, and then we risk causing much damage to Ugandans. Lynn had asked me at first about the low turn-up of youth in Kenya. And that one is going to happen in Uganda, or it is happening. Like the amount of youth that are in prison without trial, those that are detained in safe houses, and so on. Do you think the youth are having appetite to participate in politics? The answer is no. The same thing is going to happen in Uganda. Now, if His Excellency Mayega, the issue is that next time you pass a Uganda to other people to put it forward, and you are busy suffocating the youth, do you think by the time, okay, you retire and you are handing a Uganda to them, will they have learned skills of leadership, or they will also go back and then begin trying it their own way, try and error method, and then again we keep in ruins every other time? So I do disagree again with the Honorable Mayega when he said that Uganda had ever changed leadership like 5 times, and it is not an issue of changing leadership. The question is how were they being changed? He's just talking about when there were issues between Obote and Don, where people were changing government, another person spends there 2 days, 3 days, and so on. That all would itself show that that was a collapsed or democratic kind of process that we want to see, but that we see even Museveni is ruining it more and more, in particular the NRM government. You have not, Honorable Mike, I expected you to say, when you said the Ugandans, when they want, they can still institute the term limit. Are they Ugandans who do so? No. It is just a matter of bribery of the parliament. You give them money. There is a sag already, people are debating about the 40 millions. Others say take it back. If you know that these people are coming to represent people and give the free will of the people, why pay them? Or maybe it is a facilitation. And why is it that this facilitation comes at a particular time when there is a critical issue that is being discussed that is going to affect us now and the time to come? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francis, for that. And you highlight very interesting ones. Anybody have with a reaction? Okay. All right. I want to come back to you, Joseph. Yes, please.
Yes.
You have now we understand that whereas we're looking at East African community in general, we are also trying to look at our very own country, Uganda, and how best we can move forward in terms of democracy. But we definitely also picking lessons from Kenya and trying to see how we can integrate them here. The question is, though, Kenya's current political environment highlights once again elections alone are an important but not sufficient indicator of democratic processes. That is for sure. But now when we come back here in Uganda, and of course when we look at East Africa in general, there are characteristics that cut across the East African community. One, we have intolerance and exclusion. We have the wealthy always purchasing the government. The case is for Kenya, and because they've been throwing around deep state things here and there. We understand that across the East African community, pretty much the same. We have violence and intimidation. We have these two always ensure electoral victories. Democracy and justice is not an end in itself. So when we look at all this and our move into a more democratic East African community, how can we do away with these, and how best can we move forward?
I just have some good news for you. And the good news is this, that in the very likely event that the UPC reorganizes itself and that we're able to reclaim the former leadership of the party, and that the NRM is able to learn some lessons from Kenya, and that Mr. Museveni himself is able to review his conscience from where he came, whether in 1969, 70, particularly 71, as a young civil servant in Dr. Bote's office, the experiences of exile, the early 70s and then early 80s, and then the claims that he made leading to the 1970, 79, 80 elections generally to date, and that he's able to recognize that he's now a grandfather who possibly needs to follow Uhuru Kenyatta soon into some kind of rest back into Rwakitura to look after his grandchildren, while other people, like leaders, including my good brother Henry Mayega, can actually lead NRM going forward, and that they just report to him. In the event that such kind of things happen, and then we have a genuine opportunity for a transition where there is an open debate and conversation, there is a possibility that Uganda can be actually quite good. You know, I hinted to you very deliberately, because this is my game. The 1960s parliament in Uganda was the best in East Africa. It was a multi-party parliament, with the exception, of course, of the unfortunate events in 1966-67 in Uganda, and of course, in the case of the rest of the ministers that I know UPC opponents always refer to. But it was an incident, one-off incident, involving people who wanted to overthrow the government. And as Henry says, government responds in the manner in which these guys were taken to Luzira, and nothing else. If you take it to 1980, Henry was talking about five leaders. I think that's misleading, because most of the young activists in Uganda today were born after 1980. I just want to say this, that Yusuf Lule was removed after 68 days, but he was removed by the organ that elected him, the interim parliament that had been elected from Moshi, replaced by, appropriately by Godfrey Binaisa. He was removed by an appropriate organ of that elected him, and then the Mwangas took over. In 1980, was a free, fair, competitive multi-party elections, and I just want to correct this, that it's actually not true that we've never had an open, non-violent transition. We did in 1980. Elections did take place. Milton Obote was elected. UPC was elected. DP became the opposition party. Nobody has challenged that in parliament. Milton Obote went to State House and actually released, apparently, Binaisa, who was under house arrest in State House. I'm told they danced overnight until the following morning. So that has happened in Uganda. Lynn, why I'm giving you this is this, that actually Uganda is a better example of the pluralist politics we are talking about. And that's why we're referring to the monolithic one-party politics in Kenya. I think all that we need to do is to review the best of what has been in Uganda openly, review the best of what we can pick from Kenya. Kenya's best example is that the Kenyan elite, including some of the looters in Kenya, they're looters, I'm using this big word for the first time, once in a while, these guys coalesce around themselves in the interest of Kenya. That is one. Number two, systems and institutions work. The judiciary works. In many cases, even the electoral body seems to work reasonably. And in many cases, the rest of the other organs of state do work amidst if you like, the mafia of political and indeed economic corruption. Now, in a way, that is one thing that we can pick from them. And I think particularly around this election, the fact that we are up to today where we are, and you don't see shots fired, I think this is not a political thing. Ugandans just need to be ashamed that this thing is able to happen next door in Kenya, where electoral processes take place where we don't see the mess that we saw only the other year in the different streets of Uganda, indeed including Kampala. And Henry's right, to an extent, that some of these things were fairly localized to, in a way, particular political organizations, some identity politics played by certain leaders, but by and large, it is the national political climate that was played in Uganda. I want to say this, that I think I'm quite optimistic that programs like this, and I really thank Center for Constitutional Governance and whoever else are supporting this organization, indeed you guys panelists who get your times to come on these programs, that the more we're able to have this conversation, the more perhaps we're able to have a slightly much more representative parliament, a panel, including many more younger people. I spend a lot of my time doing this, by the way, Lynn, going around the country, including universities and colleges, talking to young people. The more we get them involved, the more we tell them that the future of this country, the future of, indeed, the livelihood of the African continent is in their hands more than many of the current rulers, and perhaps even less than myself and indeed Henry, we had a bit of in the afternoon of our lives. The more likely that these guys are going to listen, read more, take much more seriously into their hands the best of the possibilities for our continent and indeed our country. I'm actually much more optimistic about Uganda. The problem, though, is this, that once political parties were banned, you can imagine 20 years of a monolithic one guy ruling. It was a long time. So when political parties were restored, it just happened that DP had already got itself lost in NRA, NRM. Not surprising, because Semugera and his team officially joined these guys quite erroneously in 1986. Then, of course, UPC had been substantially weakened, and sadly, our big guy, our president, died just months after political party space had been opened. So it meant that we basically started operating like some kind of mini headless chicken. That's UPC. Possibly not surprising where we are. Miriam, UPC is the political party of this country tomorrow. The sooner you started reading quite closely our values, the sooner you quite closely continue to read our foundations, our rules, and our basics, the sooner you actually started to demystify the junk that NRA placed on us while they're trying to claim supremacy, the better. Because going forward, I think you're right, that we need to re-strengthen the politics of values, the politics of ideology, the politics of political representation, which is basically based on issues which we ever had before. UPC rooted on that. DP, by and large, rooted on that. NRM has been struggling around that. It's unlikely that they'll find their way. But indeed, as the organization that Miriam joined, it was a movement, and almost, if you like, a leftist kind of stuff, which is possibly close to Marxism. Miriam, you need to decide with Mr. Museveni whether you like to go back to that and run with it, or you need an organization that I'm sure Lynn is much more interested in, an organization which is a political party around sets of values, which is either to the left of politics, as I normally tell young people, or to the right. Politics on the African continent, by and large, is to the left of politics, or to the left of the line. By and large, big government believing in slightly higher taxes for those who are slightly wealthy, and making sure that government takes responsibility for the big agenda in terms of education, health, infrastructure, and indeed big thinking, including structural challenges that is going to be facing this continent, already facing this continent, including climate change. When we're looking at China, India, Russia, and the other big guns sort of controlling us as a zombie continent, and yet we are the richest continent in the world. Those are the big challenges. And by the way, final point, I now go around universities and I get very worried that many of our students today are not necessarily my A-level colleague students of those days. I get worried that some of the lecturers today, and absolutely with respect, are not necessarily some of the teaching assistants that we had when we were at the universities. Those are the things. So institutions of learning, academia, where we have top universities, vice chancellors, their qualifications being questioned, their criteria for heading institutions being questioned. Those are challenges. I am taking you to those because I think those are the basis on which the future of this country is going to be determined, including the quality and nature of its polity.
Thank you very much, Joseph, for that. Ambassador Mayega, as we start as we start to wind up this conversation, how can we strengthen and rethink democracy? How can we forge a sustainable, just and inclusive governance in our way forward as a community, but also as individual nations?
Well, that's Miriam, Lynn, a very good question, because I think we've been attempting to answer that question for quite a bit of time. You remember the last discussion or conversation that we had 2 weeks ago. We were talking about how we move from where we are to the next level. And I think all of us were agreed that these discussions, including the very one we are having at this particular time, are extremely important, because without discussion, then people would pick up arms and fight. That is the other alternative. But we have gone through a lot since we got independence in 1962. We've had wars, we've had insurgencies in the country. I don't know how many we've had. The last count which I did, I think we had something like 17 of them. So basically, one of the important things is for us to have these kinds of civil discussions and probably step them up, because time may not be our best ally, so that at the end of the day, we create an environment in the country like everybody aspires. But I think sometimes we make a mistake by thinking that our own thoughts are the very ones that can work for the country, forgetting that there are probably as many ideas about how Uganda should transit from where it is to a new, probably a political position. Those ideas could be as many as 42 million people who now inhabit the country. So as we are in this very talk show, let's not assume that the ideas we have or the idea Henry Mayega has actually supersedes the rest. We are many. Miriam, you have. Lynn, as a moderator, you still have your own views, I believe. Francis has. My brother Joseph probably has. And so there are so many ideas. And for anyone of us to assume that our ideas supersede the rest of the ideas that we have in the country, I think that's a very big mistake. But Miriam amused me at the beginning of our very last submission. Miriam never ceases to amuse me, because she said initially at the beginning of this conversation that people in Uganda don't have a choice. They don't have the freedom to make choices. And yet she agrees, and she said from her own mouth that initially she was in NRM and now she has moved to, she chose to belong to another political party, which I believe is FDC. She can tell us where exactly she is. I don't know why she fears to say where she is. If you're FDC, say you are. Personally, my political journey began in the UPC. That's why we are fondly relating with Joseph here, although at some point in time we disagreed because the party was becoming a family issue. We said, no, we can't accept that kind of thing. If it's becoming a family issue, we move on. And Miriam, that's very good. I'm very happy. By the way, the sister who follows me is also called Miriam. So I'm very happy to have another sister in these talk shows. And so how do we move? Extremely important. There are not so many options. The option is for us to come to a political consensus. How we determine that? I think the people who are trying to champion the cause for having more discussions, or who think that actually the current political dispensation that we have in the country probably needs improvement, I think can take the lead in this and convince, because it's all about, as we said at the beginning of this conversation, it's all about having the critical mass of support for any particular idea or option that we may have. So discussions, for me, it is discussion in the first place, discussion and discussion and discussion. That is extremely important. That, I believe that is what is going to take us forward. I'm a very fond follower of the politics in the US. I watch CNN, I watch Fox News, I watch all sorts of TV stations in the US, from the US, and I follow. But one thing that they are agreed on is that there must be discussion about everything. And so how we take this from here, Lynn, because you're asking me a question which is, you can have as many answers as there are people to answer. give you answers to the question that you give me. But I don't think we can run away from the fact that discussions, conversations of this nature, I mean, the political parties, for instance, have got iPod. That is one cent of discussion. Others may choose Parliament as a source of really these conversations. There are others like I think James Ogola, who had an idea together with the rest of the other, I mean, people like Professor Nsibambi, who thought that there should be a council of elders for advice on the political direction of the country. Fine. Convince, it's all about convincing people. And I don't think that really there can be one particular road or path that we can use in as far as developing political consensus in the country is concerned. There are as many options as we can think of. Lynn, your question was so guiding, of course, and I don't think I have any bigger answer to it than that. But earlier, Francis was talking about quite a number of things that, insecurity, I mean, the people who rioted in the roads shortly before the elections of 2021, that there was a reason Chagulanyi was arrested. Is it sometimes called Bobby Wine or something like that? And then that sparked, of course, the kinds of riots that we saw. But I mean, of course, when you riot, I am not aware of a country which massages rioters. I'm not aware of any. I mean, even if it is in the US, the security will definitely come for you. You know, and so there's no way. The moment you cross the red lines of the law, definitely security is going to come for you. So those who get involved in those kinds of things must be made aware that security definitely is going to come for you for as long as you cross the red lines of the law. For me, as far as I'm concerned, the important thing is for us to have as more discussions of this nature as possible, and that one definitely will have to result into building consensus on the many political challenges that we have as a country. Lynn, I think at the moment that's what I have to say. I don't have so much.
Right, thank you very much, Ambassador. Okay, Miriam, I will still pose the same question because as Ambassador has highlighted, we are still trying to find ways of how we move forward as a community in terms of democracy. And we still ask, how can we strengthen, rethink democracy? How can we forge sustainable, just and inclusive governance, which definitely everybody is poking holes at and saying, we are not democratic. We cannot claim to be democratic. So we need to find solutions to that.
Yes, Lynn, we need a way forward, especially for Uganda. We all agree, even with Ambassador, that the political situation prevailing in Uganda cannot be called democratic by any length, whether you really whitewash it or whatever. So we still have a lot of work to do as Ugandans, as whether you are in leadership, opposition, or in the business, private sector, or you are a farmer, or you are in academia. And in my view, democracy is not only built by political actors. Democratic process is built by everybody. For instance, in the Kenyan scenario, they are where they are because of the civic activism, the participation of the citizens, the private sector, the non-government actors, the non-political actors, the academia, and the people on the street. The people have to want something and have to push for it, and that will direct the leaders on the choices to make. So in Uganda, we really lack that participation of the masses. That has been a result of so many issues, including the stifling of the political process is what I was talking about, Ambassador Mayega. We don't have freedom to even debate politics, to associate. If you block a leader, say Kizza Besigye, from accessing my mother in Bushenyi and have that conversation, there can't be a feedback, there can't be that interaction. So there is lack of civic awareness, there is lack of civic participation, and we can't, you see, democracy is not about MPs going in parliament voting ABCD. That's like an end result. But the build-up starts from the grassroots. The build-up starts from schools. The build-up starts from that debate like we are having today. And we don't have that transparency. We don't have that activity going on. So that's what makes even our future so unpromising even today. What will happen? Do we even have a plan after Museveni? What is next? And who's going to lead that process? That's the lacuna that we are facing. The political, even in NRM, I'm not sure you even have an idea what is going to happen after Museveni. And Ambassador Mayega, that's why we were emphasizing with even Ochieno that we need term limits. We need political predictability. We need to know that after X, there is Y, there is Z coming up. So what is happening today in Uganda is a blank. You after Museveni, what? Suppose Museveni collapses today and tomorrow we are looking for a leader. Of course, you are going to refer to the constitution and say, oh, we have a VP, we have a speaker. But we all know those things don't hold. And we are not sure about tomorrow. That is something to scare all of us. And so when we are chatting for the way forward is, what should we do about our country as far as democracy is concerned, and how do we get there? I would like to call upon our middle class, the fellow elites, those people who are driving in SCs in Kampala, going to the bar, going home, and thinking that politics is none of their business. Oh, it's your business. Because tomorrow what Ambassador Mayega refers to as a riot. By the way, Ambassador, the right protest is constitutional and every Uganda has a right to protest. So when you call it unlawful, I think you're really talking about a dictatorship. But under democracy, it's very lawful, and the police and the security should actually facilitate the protest. So in Uganda, our elites need to wake up. The civic space, the non-political actors. If you are a trader and you think that politics don't concern you, you are dreaming, because when the roads are blocked tomorrow, your goods won't go anywhere and your business won't go on. I would also like to refer to the Kenyan process. This is the first time the Kenyans in diaspora were voting. So far, the process, the results that were coming in were showing that the process is transparent. And as Francis referred to Ugandan processes, the courts recommended that the EC, our current Uganda Electoral Commission, should facilitate the people in diaspora and the people in prison to vote in 2026. But so far, nothing has happened on ground. So that's something to even think about, as we have so few years to go. That's also another big issue with you. That's how NRM government frustrates the Uganda democratic processes. They push for reforms 6 months to the voting. Then the Electoral Commission has even no time to implement the reforms. Then they say, oh, we tried. So legally, the things are on paper, but the implementation, the will to facilitate that implementation is not there. And the end result is something which is half standard election, which we have had year in, year out. And when we are analyzing Uganda, I think we have reached at that level, Ambassador. The reason I'm not telling you my party is I still dream of a good, ideal-oriented, issue-based political party. And I hope it comes up. I want a party which is going to mobilize the masses. I want a party which is going to mobilize the young people, the farmers, the traders. I want a party which all Ugandans believe in. It shouldn't be about the leader. It should be about issues. The issues you are fighting for, the issues you are standing for. So those are the issue-based political party. Ochieno said UPC used to be that. Today, Mr. Ochieno, I don't understand what UPC we are looking at, because there is a UPC that made an alliance with NRM, then there is another UPC. So I'm confused, but the old UPC used to have ideals, and I agree with you. Those were good ideals, and we should be maybe using them as an example moving forward. When it comes to our history, our painful history is used as an example to frustrate democracy. On the other hand, I would think our painful history should be a motivation for us to work for a better democratic process so that we are not derailed back there. Today, what we see is nothing like that. For instance, we have an educated, well-trained army, but which is very highly unprofessional. The way they kidnap people, the way they arrest people arbitrarily, the way they interfere in political processes, actually doesn't make them any different from the old military, whatever, I don't know what they would call them, that we used to have. So they're highly trained, they look smart, but the way they conduct themselves is very highly unprofessional, and Seven promised us as a professional army, but we are yet to see that, and I hope we can see that happening. We need an independent electoral commission which is coming from the people, which has the people's mandate, the electoral commission which people are going to believe in. And yes, we still need the term limits going forward. That's unquestionable, that's undebatable. And we also need civic awareness, like civic discussion. Politics should be demystified. You know, NRM has made us believe that if you are opposition, you are enemy of a government. If you are this, that should be demystified. A political discussion, whether you are opposition or you are in a ruling party, you all want a better Uganda, and you are working towards building good policies. So all discussions should be encouraged. And we also, when it comes to multipartism, I think we need to build a culture of supporting our parties. But that comes from building the parties we believe in. You can't support something you don't believe in. Today, if I can give an example of a church, if you go to church and you see how people are giving in that church, that's because they believe in that system. But can we translate that into politics? We build parties we believe in, whether it's a farmer's party or a student's party, a party that you believe in, where people are willing to build and give and support constructively. Of course, constitutionally, the government is supposed to fund and facilitate a party, so that we don't depend on foreign donors and all that, and the parties are stronger. So those because they are stronger institutions of democracy. We can't have democracy without strong political parties, whether they are ruling party or opposition. And the ruling party today looks like strong, but it's because it's in government. I don't think NRM can stand a day out of government. So it's as weak as anybody, any other party. So Ambassador Mayega, whether it's FDC or NRM, we really need strong political parties, which we lack today.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Miriam. Over to you, Francis Kamuhanda. We are winding up. We are actually out of time. We are asking ourselves, can we really strengthen and rethink democracy? Can we forge sustainable, just and inclusive governance as an East African community, but also as Uganda?
Yes, Lynn, as how other panelists have said, it is possible for us to forge a way forward for the democracy in East Africa and Uganda in particular. But there are fundamentals that we have to do. Like, for example, we all agree that at a party level, or whoever wants to take leadership, there must be basic values that they stand for, and those values that encompass every other Ugandan. And that's why for us at ANT, we have our core values of transparency, good leadership and governance, of respecting the freedoms and democracies of the people, and so on. And it is also important that all this, what we may think of democracy or whatever, it all premises on institutions and structures of governance. Once those have collapsed, like as it is in the current NRM, then there is nothing that you can build. So we have to go back and have conversations along, not only mere conversations, but revitalizing the institutions of government, so that it is not like how it is. President Museveni is the state and the state is himself. What he dictates and says, then is what will work. So we have to go back, as we are saying, how Joseph said, how things used to work in the past in Uganda that other people were emulating. It's because there were solid structures, there were solid institutions of government, and they were being respected. But currently that's not is happening. So we have to not only, like as I've said, having a conversation along that. And I will then conclude by saying that all that can be possible for us to have a clean and hygienic, proactive conversation only when either the NRM accepts that there are some mistakes that have been made that are fundamental that need to be reversed. For example, the age limit, so that we have a president can be disposed of and new other people come in. The term limit itself has to be, like, once they put back that into the Constitution of the Republic of Uganda, it should be entrenched. Nobody should change it. And as Miriam said, you have to allow people to have the freedom to go and converse to people, to go and interface with people. Even if me and you and Ambassador keep coming on this platform and talking and talking and talking, excluding the majority of the Ugandans. And how are those ones reached? If we have a true multi-party dispensation, my party should freely decide that we are going to have a rally or a training in District X, and nobody should stop them. Because you would ask yourself, should political parties be active only during the period of election? No. By now, we should be reaching out to people, spreading our ideology, telling them the alternative policies. Miriam was talking about civic education. Yeah, because people even should know why they need to vote a given MP, or the kind of ideology they are voting for, or even how most people don't know how government functions. I will give you an example. One young man in our village, somebody was saying, you see, there is misappropriation of funds. And then this guy said, misappropriation of funds? I have my funds in my pocket here. For you, why did you give yours to government and you are saying they are misappropriating it, it is not being used properly? You just see like that lack of knowing. They are in Uganda, but people don't know what is in Uganda. So not until we have our people, or we have a clean house, that we can now be able to sell to the East African community. Because the biggest question, Lynn, would be, for all these years, the East African community has been there. Why does it collapse? And why do they revive it? And then again it collapses. Because as you go there, you are taking all the junk from Uganda, or the junk from Kenya, or the junk from Tanzania, or the junk from Congo, name it, and you go and put it on table. At the end of the day, you come out with total confusion. So not until we sort out that, and then we learn how to have positive conversations that we can agree to disagree on principle, then I don't think we would be moving ahead. And then also, the likes of His Excellency Mayega and his boss, to take heart and know that when we talk of something that is of national importance, they take it serious, and then they say, okay, this one, we can change it. Like, again, I would say there are institutions or organs of government that belongs to all of us that should not be misused by the people in power. For example, the army, the police, the judicial system, even by the way, the parliament itself, how it is being manipulated. Generally, there is no institution of government that is standing without being manipulated, and that is wrong. And that is not a fertile ground that you can now begin dreaming of the East African community or African cooperation and so on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Francis. Now we conclude with you, Joseph Ochieno, whom we thank very much for your time. And you've heard from everybody, and I will still ask you, can we consolidate our fragile democracy as it is in the entire East African community, but also particularly in Uganda?
No, in Uganda, we don't have a democracy. We have an educated dictatorship. That has been my position. That is our position. That's the official UPC position. And that's the factual, contextual position. But calling it a dictatorship does not mean that we are at war with each other. That is a matter of fact, and it's a scholarly fact. But I just want to say this, though, that in Kenya, the leaders, notwithstanding all the challenges, the leaders at the top recognized that something needed to be done, particularly, I think, because of the shock of the over 1,200 Kenyans dead in 2007 elections, post-election violence. Global leaders converged, African leaders converged, top Africans like Kofi Annan and others are converged. The ICC, we have a difference of opinion on this. We select, pick and choose when it's convenient for us. Got involved. And I think in a way that compelled the Kenyan populace, the Kenyan polity, and the Kenyan upper middle class to rethink some of their positions. So in a way, it's not surprising that not so long ago, we heard about the famous handshake that now brings extraordinarily Raila Odinga and Uhuru Kenyatta together, and in a way, Ruto, who was once upon a time a colleague of Raila, taking on the other side. Whatever happens, the election outcome of Kenya, we hope, is one in which there is a consensus and there is an opportunity for that country to move forward so that we're able to learn lessons from it. In conclusion, I just needed to pick that because it's really primarily why we are having this conversation. Now, that said, I also want to just clear one thing before I conclude. Henry referred variously referred to UK and Germany. For the record, indeed, Chancellor Merkel was the leader for quite a long time. In European terms, it's extraordinarily long, and that was 16 years, Angela Merkel. But she was a leader of a democratic Germany, and she was a leader elected variously, politically, competitively, I think nearly 3.5 to 4 times, including a coalition. But none of the opposition leaders were locked up. Nobody died in the streets of Berlin or Bonn. So some of these examples are neither here nor there, but it's fair enough representation. Margaret Thatcher, indeed, was a leader for 11 years. That's the longest in contemporary terms, in UK times. But she was a leader over 3 elections. Blair just about managed to make Margaret Thatcher's time. I was a member of the Labour Party, at the time, very active, and privileged to know some of these individuals. But the democracies and these guys went and moved on. The Conservative Party has been in power now 10 years, and it has had 3 different leaders, and very soon it might have the 4th. So these are contexts about these things. So back to Uganda, what really do we do? I actually think we need to wake up as my generation. We need to wake up and see some of the things that is happening in Kenya. And some people were joking the other day that the deputy head of the Ugandan Electoral Commission is in Kenya. Maybe as they travel back to Uganda, including their allowances, they should examine their conscience and consider that the Ugandans working for Ugandans. It's Milton Obote, my president, who was president of the party with me and Henry as colleagues in the party cabinet, who told Blair in a letter in which I hand delivered that there are no half measures when it comes to democracy and human rights. So we can't pick and choose in Kenya, nor should we pick and choose in Uganda when it's convenient to us. So this is really something that we are talking about today, and is very real in Uganda, and I have suggested, fairly in a non-political way, that the system in Uganda is neither here nor there. I want to put it there. I want to repeat that democracy has ever existed in Uganda, and that democracy in Uganda is possible. A competition of ideas is possible. And Miriam, the UPC that you knew and your father knew, I know that, is the UPC of today, and the UPC that by and large I represent. Jim McKenna, my brother, and Jim McKenna, my brother, and a few, and his wife and a few others went to NRA, but that is not UPC. Henry did the right thing. Henry was a colleague of mine. Actually, Henry was a vice chairman of the party structure at home when he was still in exile. Henry opted to move on to go to NRM. I don't fault him on that openly. I think maybe that's the lesson that Jimmy needs to learn, and a few of his friends, so that they leave Uganda People's Congress to go through whatever challenges it's facing. Miriam, that party is very, very likely looking forward to a better Uganda, in which leadership at the helm is one in which we are focusing on the interests of young people of our country, women of our country, workers of our country, meaning peasants of our country, and so ordinary citizens, so that together we're able to consolidate from the difficult past we had, and the difficult past and experience we have today, and the experience and lesson we're able to learn from Kenya. Our country is possible. We just need to do it better.
Okay, thank you very much, Joseph. Thank you, Francis. Thank you, Henry. And thank you, Miriam, for your time today. It was a wonderful conversation. And I hope that as a country, as an East African community bloc, we can learn and continue to learn from each other, and line of democracy. I thank you, and I wish you a fantastic weekend. We'll catch you again, hopefully next time.